Could someone say something to make sure I can hear you?
Good evening, Ms. Levy. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Well, that's excellent timing because we were just about to get started. So at this time, it is 5:36 p.m. on Tuesday, June 29th, and we'd like to call a meeting to order at this time. Ms. Francis, could we get a roll call, please?
Present.
I cannot hear Ms. Bloke.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Delgado?
Present.
Jacobs? Amy Levy?
Here?
Sean Levy?
Present.
Miller? Present. Wong?
Here.
All right, thank you. It sounds like we have Ms. Levy and Ms. Delgado joining us remotely, and Ms. Jacobs was unable to be here this evening. And we're on to item 1D now, approval of meeting minutes. Would anybody like, oh, nope, I skipped ahead. I'm so sorry. We're at 1C, approval of the agenda. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve our agenda this evening?
So moved.
Second.
Can we have a motion and a second? Is there any discussion about our agenda this evening? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there any opposed? All right, motion passes unanimously. Item 1D, approval of meeting minutes. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve our minutes from June 4th, June 9th, and June 23rd?
So move.
Second.
We have a motion by Delgado and a second by Anderson to approve the meeting minutes for the dates listed. Is there any discussion on this motion?
Is this the last batch of seasoned minutes that we'll be approving?
Go ahead.
That's a great question. Ms. Shope is ill today, so I do not have the answer to that question. I will ask her and email the board.
Great question, Board Member Levy. Thank you for that. Does anybody else have any questions or discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye. Are there any opposed?
I'm abstaining.
Thank you. So we have 5 ayes and 1 abstention. All right, that brings us to item 2, board discussion, information, or action items. And item 2A brings us to our board self-evaluation results and data discussion. So we have allocated 60 minutes for this part of our meeting this evening. And I see that I'm listed as the person, but I'm actually going to hand this over to Dr. Kieser to introduce this next segment. And we'll go from there. Go ahead, please.
No problem. So as asked at a previous board meeting, the board wanted to do the self-evaluation, working with school perceptions to go through the board self-evaluation tool. So we have representatives here from school perceptions, and I'll have them introduce themselves momentarily to both walk through a copy, and I have uploaded a copy because it's fresh off the presses into board docs for the community to consume, and these gentlemen will be here to walk through the tool and then be able to clarify any of the pieces that as far as the tool. Where the next steps from this tool are rest with the board. School Perceptions helps to administer the tool, to my understanding, but as far as the next steps after what we do with that information is left up to the board at that point. And I'm seeing some nods from our presenters, so I'll turn it over to them. And I will be running the slide deck.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, there we go. Red's good. So I'm Bill Foster. I'm the president of School Perceptions, and I guess just a background on our company. We're actually a Wisconsin-based company. We've been around for more than 20 years now. We do a lot of staff, student, and parent surveys. We've actually done surveys for the Beloit School District. We've done over 800 projects for the sake of referendum preparation, community surveys for that. But that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. We're here to talk about your board self-evaluation results. So I'll let my partner Rob introduce himself, and then we'll get into it.
Sure. So my name is Rob Demise. I'm the research director and a project manager at School Perceptions. And I do a mixture of exactly what we're doing tonight, so staff, student, and parent surveys for school districts, and then a little bit of our community survey as well.
So just a little background on the tool. This tool we actually developed initially about 10 years ago. It was based on what's called the Key Works of School Boards, which is a national planning framework. We then partnered with the School Board Association in Wisconsin to create this tool. It's been administrated, again, for about 10 years, made available at no cost to all school districts in the state. And every year, more and more districts are taking it. In fact, I saw you guys took it last year. We're going to take a look at those results as well as this year's. And that also gives us the ability to create comparison analysis. So part of your report will show how your board self-evaluated compared to other boards who are taking it in the state. And I just wanted to also give Rob the opportunity to give you a little bit of the research we've gone through in the last year or two as it relates to board planning. So, Rob?
Yeah, and this might help if you scroll ahead to page 3. This is a page called Overview. Yep, one back. Yep, so I'm looking at the objectives of the annual board development tool here. And so there are 3 goals for school boards that put this into place, and those 3 are here. They're to expose board members to a comprehensive array of school board responsibilities based on the research and framework provided in the key work of school boards. So that's what Bill just mentioned a moment ago. The second objective is to identify areas where the board is aligned, but also where further dialogue and discussion is needed. And then finally, to identify areas where board members expressed an interest in receiving additional information and or training. So there's kind of a dual path to the creation of this annual board development tool. Obviously, the key work of school boards is part of it. And then we would not be a good educational research firm if we didn't put on our own researcher hats and contribute our own work here. So I just want to take you a little bit briefly through the research that we did that we're basing the survey off of. And so part of that research asserts that you as school board members do not create learning directly. The direct learning is happening in your classrooms across the Beloit School District. Rather, your primary role is to create conditions that promote learning in those classrooms. Which is certainly not an insignificant piece of the puzzle. In fact, research shows that the effectiveness of school board governance is the single most important factor for school districts' effectiveness in increasing student achievement. And that's a pretty bold sentence, and I actually want to repeat that for you. The effectiveness of school board governance is the single most important factor for school districts' effectiveness in increasing student achievement. And the reason I say that twice is because what you do in this room right here does indeed have a direct impact on student achievement in classrooms, which I think naturally begs the question, so what makes for an effective board? We in our own research narrowed that down to 4 items. One is goal setting. So establishing clear, easily understood, and non-negotiable learning-focused goals. These goals are identified, they are aligned, and they are defended with evidence-based decision-making. And you as board members can act both as a roadblock and a champion, meaning that you are able to keep the district's focus on them and make sure that other distracting initiatives aren't getting in the way of what you've determined as your most important learning-focused goals. And you're a champion of those goals to make sure that they're seen through to fruition. The second piece of the effectiveness puzzle for you is training and professional development. So you as board members are able to realign and preserve funding and leading by example. So undertaking professional development as a school board team. And again, not just individual board members, but going through professional development as a team with the specific goals of being trained in productive conflict, building working relationships, and also being trained in best practices for public communication. The third of the fourth effectiveness pieces is focused governance. So effective school board members spend less time on day-to-day operational issues that are better handled by the superintendent that you hire to do that work, and avoid micromanagement, but rather set and sustain goals that the entire district can follow, including the superintendent. And then finally, community in and outreach. So what this means is collaborative relationships with the community without letting special interests infiltrate your work. So you are both listening and proactively gathering information, but at the same time, you're also the district's biggest cheerleader. So again, just to recap, those are the four pieces of what makes highly effective school boards effective. And that piece, along with the work that we see in the key work of school boards from the National Association of School Boards, is how we base the items that you saw in this survey when you took it. The final piece in this page, which I know is not going to be new news for the board members that took it, but there is a scale here. Scrolling just a little bit further down from fully achieved, based on the goals that are set forth in this survey. Are the goals mostly achieved? Are they partially achieved? Have they not yet been achieved or started? And then finally, is the survey taker unsure? So I will turn it over to Bill to give the opening of your results.
All right, the next page on page 4 is a simple bar chart. If you can scroll in there just a little bit. So as you recall, you went from page to page to page when you took the self-evaluation. There were a number of items, maybe from 4 to 8 items per page. We then created a simple average and then kind of ranked. And these are the high-level areas from budgeting, planning. Those are areas where you self-assess as better. And then you can see lower on the list is data-driven decision-making and vision. So this is kind of high-level data. It's kind of out of context. You say, okay, well, is that good? Is that not good? So if we scroll to the next page, we begin to put the data into context. And you can go all the way down to the bottom, actually. These are the kind of the areas we go into, but we start to get into the data itself. And what we did was we compare you to the state average. Now, you just have to remember, this is your assessment of your own board conduct, actions, and how you're doing, compared to how other board members think they do it. So the key works, you've got community leadership. Beloit's a 2.29, state average is a 2.83. We then calculate a difference, and then we color code where red is a negative variance, and green is a positive variance. So you can see against these indexes, and by the way, an index is built by typically 4 questions that are nested within. You can see across the board for those, I think there's 6 indexes, how you compare to the state average. So you're lower. And I think, that's being honest, that's how you're doing right now. The goal of this tool is not to make you feel bad. The goal of this tool is to help you set priorities and begin to plan. And then you have a baseline, and then you begin to make progress. So those are your self-evaluations against the state average. So then we go down to the item level, and I'll let Rob take that over.
So here I want to draw your attention, you can stay up on this page here, but to the top and the bottom of this table, so it does span a few pages. So I don't think the best use of your time, since this will be in front of you, is to go through line by line. I do want to take you through a few of them both, though, at the top and the bottom. So again, how are we getting to these numbers? You'll see that the scale is again up top. So if you're fully achieved, that is scored as a 4. If it's not yet achieved or started, that's a 1. So that's how the math is actually being put forward here. So there are 3 areas all in the category of community engagement where you were above the state average. And those 3 items from the survey included, we have a legislative advocacy process to monitor issues and communicate our position to both legislators and the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. You were 0.23 points above the state average there. Your second area above the state average, again in community engagement, was we regularly discuss legislative issues during board meetings. And the third and final difference, slightly above the state average, again in community engagement, was we invite legislators to our schools for tours and discussions of important education issues. And then as I look down a little bit, we start to get in the red a little, and again, red means that you're slightly below the state average. But as I look at the categories, I'm seeing a little bit in terms of budgeting, and a little bit in terms of policy. And so what I'm seeing here, I guess maybe more what I'm curious about, is whether this is a function of the time of year. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the state capitol, 1 hour north, in terms of the budget process and how that will shake out for you through the remainder of the summer and the fall. So it does strike me that there does seem to be a strong legislative component here and legislative issues, legislator communication. Certainly there's some financial and basic principles of finance in terms of how your board members evaluated their knowledge of those. And so again, obviously I'm not privy to all your meetings, but I'm wondering if this is kind of where that comfort level is coming from, based purely on the time of year. So if, as and when you continue this survey, that may be something to keep an eye on is, do you retain that comfort with the state budgeting cycle and communication with legislators, or do you see some of these other items pop to the top depending on what time of year it is? Then, if you have to scroll down just a little bit here, so I am looking at the bottom, the middle of page 9. As opposed to maybe some of the community engagement or legislative and fiscal side of things, where we're seeing that you're significantly below the state average in terms of board operations and culture. So starting from the bottom here, whether your board meetings are effective and efficient is quite a bit below the state average. Similarly, in another category of board operations, right above that, we evaluate the superintendent at least annually against clear goals and with performance criteria that include measures of student achievement. The Beloit average there was 1.86, and the board meetings are effective and efficient, one run right below was 1.57. So if I just scroll back to the scale here, and you don't have to move your screen, but between 1 and a 2 on the scale is right between not achieved and started and partially achieved. So it sounds like maybe you're thinking about it, that you're starting some work there, but maybe at least from the survey, it sounds like that's the direction that this school board is heading. And then in terms of relationship building and culture of the school board, again, we do see some items that are substantially below the state average here in terms of the board modeling mutual respect and professional behavior. The community believing the district is a responsible steward of its financial resources, and then another cultural piece moving up from the bottom. Our community believes the district is effectively governed and makes decisions with the best interests of students in mind. Again, a culture piece and a little bit below the state average there. But what I do want to point out is as you move on to the next page, we did have quite a bit of green here coming up on this next one. So what this is telling me here is it's looking in the difference from your most recent annual board development tool, which is the one that we're talking about at the moment, and the one prior. So in other words, we're looking at data for the 2020-2021 school year versus how this board or the makeup of the school board scored themselves in 2019-2020. Now, as I quickly look through here, I'm seeing a lot of green and substantially more green than what's going on at this time. So the bright side is it looks like a lot of the elements that you have here are moving in the proper direction. We want to see a page full of green with growth over time. So that's the good news, is certainly you're making some progress on some of these issues. But what I would point out is that the issues that seem to show the most importance, there's some congruence and correlation between the categories. So I see more of that community engagement piece, a little bit more of the policy. Not only did that seem to go well in this most recent annual board development tool, but that also seems to be where the most gain is. In other words, you seem to be improving in areas that were already pretty good. And so we want to dig into some of the areas where there wasn't quite as much growth. And so as we scroll down a little bit to see the difference between these two annual board development tools, again, it's a few pages down. Page 12 and page 13 of what you're seeing up on your screen. Again, where we're seeing some declines are some of the same areas and categories that we're seeing are a little bit lower scores this year as well. So in terms of the culture of the school district, in terms of some of the board operations, not only do we see those show up as red in this year's data, but we are seeing some declines over the previous round as well in 1920. So there's certainly a lot here. Those were some of the themes that stuck out to me. But I do want to turn it back over to Bill to talk a little bit about these standard deviation items on page 14 of this document.
Thanks, Rob. So far we've really covered your items compared to the state at an item level and an index level, and then comparing yourself to a year ago. The other thing we do with the data is we look at standard deviation. So you might say, well, what's that going to tell me? And what that is a measure of agreement between the board members. So if one board member would rank you as a 4 and another would rank you as a 1, you will have a higher standard deviation. And that would be an area that we would encourage you to talk about. So if you all agree that we're really not doing very good, we're kind of a 1, we're kind of a 2, we're a 1.5 or whatever, if you all agree, you don't need to talk about it. You know you need to work on it and get better, but you don't have to have a discussion. But the area where there's not consensus, where there is a larger standard deviation, is on, starts out with vision. Our vision and top priority is student achievement. So you've got a standard deviation of 1.21. So that would be something, if you're going to allocate some time this summer to a board retreat, you say, what things should we be talking about? You can kind of start with some of the higher standard deviation items to say, let's get on the same page. So if we can be on the same page in terms of our current reality, then we can then decide where it is we want to go. But if we disagree, if some people are saying we're really quite good, if other people are saying we're really struggling, we haven't started yet, that's a problem. So you've got to talk about that. So this page 14 and page 14 is just your 15th highest standard deviation items. Again, you can use that information to help direct some of your conversations. And then really pages 15 through the rest of the report is just your breakdown in terms of your individual averages. You can see the actual items and the averages that were calculated for each of the pages that were on the evaluation. And then what we did was we starting on page 20, I believe it is the verbatim comments. And there's actually quite a few. Considering we only had 7 people who responded, there's quite thoughtful comments here, and we don't analyze those. You're a small group, you can read them yourselves, but they're quite thoughtful, and they're well structured, and I think they provide some insights as well. So then I think Dan was right. We're not here to tell you what to do, but here's just a couple maybe editorial thoughts about the data. And that is, first of all, this is your self-reflection on your own work, so that's important. It's not your community saying this, it's not your staff, it's not anyone else, this is your self-evaluation. The real question in my mind is, what are your priorities? You know, and Rob talked about the importance of setting goals, but you can't work on all these things. There's too many things here. So the real question is, what are the leverage items? What are the areas that we want to pick off 1, 2, or 3 things that we are going to commit to and focus to this fall? And there's a lot of things that will then correlate and come along if you get those 3 things in place. And Rob talked about the importance of clear goals. And the other is just one of, I think, clear kind of chemistry and culture. If you've got a level of trust and good communication, you can get a lot done. If that doesn't exist, I think you have to circle back and talk about that. And again, we don't know. You know, we're coming in, we're saying this is your own data about yourself, so we're really not in a position to give you a whole lot of advice there. But it strikes me that is not biting off too many things. You know, 1, 2, or 3 things we're going to really work on and focus on is, I guess, my advice as I look at the data. So questions on the report for Rob or I?
If anybody wants to just like throw a question mark in the chat, we can go that way if that works for everyone. Go ahead, Vice President Levy.
Well, thank you for your assistance on this evening. So just for, get an understanding, when we look at the differences, like on page 5, beginning, Beloit's average, this is how the 7 of us rated ourselves. And it's just compared to the state average, just how, when everyone else who took the survey, how they saw themselves.
That's
And
correct.
so the difference, you're just noting that there's a difference.
There's a difference.
Right.
And, you know, it could be that you're a lot more honest than other boards.
Right. Oh, right.
I mean, it could be.
That's what I was aiming for
Yeah.
in the survey.
And it really is. And actually, that's kind of important. You know, if you're in denial, if you're saying, no, it's really better and we don't care. So I don't see that. And actually, when we first created this tool, you know, with all our software, one thing that we really pride ourselves at School Perception is creating great comparison data. But this was one tool that I said, I don't think comparison data is that helpful.
Right.
But boards have come back and said, no, we really want to know. So there is, I don't know if it's being competitive or what. I don't see it as that critical, but it does put your data into context, and maybe that will help
Right.
your conversation.
And then secondly, I saw, like I said, when you listed the top 15, that gives us an idea with the greatest standard deviation, what things we might want to work on, because that's the greatest level of difference for us.
Those are things you're not agreeing on.
Right.
For whatever reason.
Okay.
You know, and that's just a good question. What, you know, you could just bring up each one and talk about it and say, where'd you land? Why'd you land there? And maybe you can seek to understand why people had different
And
viewpoints.
so then on pages 6 and 7, going all the way to page 9, with the difference, they're just listed at what was above the state average and then closest to right there to the furthest difference. That's the only ranking. And so like the question items, they're broken up by categories just by how far the difference was.
Yeah, they're really sorted biggest variance to smallest variance against the state average. So it's not particular to any category or question.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Vice President Levy. Board Member Wong?
Thank you for this information and the presentation. You're very concise and thorough. I have 2 questions. The first one is approximately how many schools school boards take this survey throughout the state?
I knew you were going to ask me that. I don't know exactly. I would guess the answer is, you know, we don't do reports for everyone. We probably do about 40 reports per year, but I suspect close to half of the districts in the state are probably using the tool. It's a free tool, and they can log in and see their results. They don't get comparisons, things like that. That's something we provide in the report. But I bet close to half, maybe 40% of the districts, and there's 425 districts, so close to 200.
And then the second question is, and you probably don't know this as well, but I'll throw it out there anyways. Is there a correlation between the school rankings within the state and the scorecards that you're delivering to the boards?
That's a great question. Research guy?
That is a good question. It's a pretty logical connection, but whether I can say that that's true or not, no, I'd rather be honest and say I don't know the answer to that than try to guess.
The other thing that's important to kind of capture is there is a lag between what I think you're saying is measured in academic success or academic performance and a functional board. So you can have a great board, but it takes a while to get pieces and policies and practices in place in order to create an environment where teachers are excelling and kids are learning, for then those kids to take tests and for it to show up on state report cards. So I suspect there might be a 2 or 3 year lag between a great board taking action and where you actually see it turning up. So that's where it's a little bit dangerous. But no, as the answer, we don't really have, we've never gone in and looked at that. But we might do that. It's a good idea.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So it's great questions. Anybody else have any questions or comments for our presenters this evening? Oh, go ahead, Vice President Levy.
So on the, with the longitudinal comparison for Beloit, we only have a 1920 to compare ourselves to?
Yes, there was not, we didn't look back, there was not 18-19 data, and I didn't go before that.
That's fine, right?
But yeah,
Makes sense.
but last year you did.
Okay. And so if we take it the next 7 years, you'll have longitudinal data over the next 7 years?
Yes, we will, for every year.
Yes.
Yeah, we can see trends at every item for each year.
the last question here. For districts that have used it as a diagnostic and actually begin to work, what are you aware of districts that have, their intent was to be honest to themselves about their work and engage in their work using the tool for reflection? Are you aware of any that you have worked with that have used this longitudinal part to really judge and mark the differences in their rating of themselves?
Yeah, there are a lot of districts that are really into it and really use it as part of their standard practice every year. Some are doing it by themselves, as part of a summer retreat. Some will have WASB consultants assist with that. And then there's other consultants in the state that provide, kind of that facilitation service to kind of, let's talk about the data, let's understand the data, and let's build our plans from that. But there's a lot, it's really, once people start using it, they seem to continue to use it because it does facilitate conversations that might not otherwise come up. So it's kind of sticky. People actually like it and continue to use it.
Thank you very much, Vice President Levy. Board Member Levy?
The bulk of my question was just answered with that response. And I know you're just here to deliver the information and not tell us how to utilize it. But I'm curious, anecdotally, have you heard from other boards of, we found ourselves in a similar position and these are the activities or practices that we instituted to best utilize this data to put us in a better place as a board?
It's a great question. I think the answer is just the high-level question. They use it as part of their typically summer retreat board planning. So it facilitates that conversation of how are we doing as a team, as a group, how are we working together. That's part of it, but then you have to transition over to, like Rob was saying, what are our goals? And let's get those nailed down, and then let's integrate those into our monthly meetings or whatever it is. But I see most boards kind of on the, and there's actually different ones, but I'd say the typical is kind of the spring assessment, summer planning, and then the administration then comes up with a plan that is then communicated in opening day, deployed, and then the cycle goes through. We measure again in the spring.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Board Member Levy. Does anybody else have any questions or comments at this time for our presenters? I would just like then to say, I do want to thank you both very much for compiling this report for us and sharing your time with us this evening. And just to editorialize a little bit, what came to mind as I was looking through your report and when you made your comments about, the reds and things like that, our district is preparing to do our own strategic planning, and it's personally my expectation of our district that we're going to be honest with ourselves, honest with the community, and really authentic in our desire to create systems of improvement. And I think that starts at the board level. So I truly do appreciate that. And I think that based on the interactions that we've had so far this year with our board, I just want to say to everybody here, I'm very confident in our ability to continue to progress and work through a lot of these priorities. So I guess I just want to thank you, gentlemen, again for your time, and thank our board for taking the time to so thoughtfully contribute to this so that we really can do the work. So does anybody else have any comments at this point? All right. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Have a good evening, and we'll hope to see you again.
You will. Thank you.
Great. All right. Let me just jump over to our agenda here, and that takes us to item 2B, which is the discussion on expulsion options and training for the board. So just a little background. Last week, there was the annual resolution we typically do came forward about whether or not to employ an independent hearing officer. The board had, I think, a pretty robust discussion, and the majority voted against renewing or putting forward that resolution. So that put us in a situation where now we need to move forward and provide ourselves some options for how to do our due diligence with this process. This is new, I believe, to everybody here. So I just want to thank Dr. Kieser and his team for their work, and Mr. Bukema for his work in putting together this presentation this evening to get us started. And I just do want to comment before I hand it over that the purpose of this evening is to give us like a high level understanding about how to proceed forward. And the expectation is going to be that there will be at least a workshop that we will be attending to really deep dive into this process, possibly with additional kind of follow-up PD as needed. So just wanted to throw that out there. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over then to Dr. Kieser.
All right, thank you, Board President Miller, and laying that context. So the board had asked that I present some information in regards to expulsion information, potential training for the board, as well as any additional training recommended for the board, such as implicit bias training or anything else. I reached out to Rob, and his colleague Sheila are here tonight to talk a little bit more, provide some clarifications, and just to reiterate, the goal to an outcome for tonight's conversation is seeing the direction in which the board wants to go and what type of information wants to be shared out in a training and what that could look like. I did share with the board some information, some initial information and some templates as a thought provoker in terms of what could be provided, but then again, as not to speak for Rob and Sheila, these are just examples of what tools and templates and processes that they can provide for the board in building out this process. The information I'm going to share today is very high level in terms of explaining the expulsion process now that the board has made the decision that it will be hearing the expulsion cases. And so state statute and board policy will become very paramount in terms of background understanding. And again, as part of that tool and training and transition, because the board has not done this in a number of years, it is also an opportunity that is to acclimate the board to
I apologize for the interruption, but at home the volume is going in and out, and there's kind of an echo. There's just a wide range in volume.
Sorry,
If everybody, no, you're fine. Can everybody make sure they're muted? I think that might have something to do with it. Board Member Levy, yes, sorry, I was going to call on you when he was done speaking. Go ahead and interject again if that continues to be a problem. That's okay?
Yeah, that was the question mark.
All right, cool. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Does it sound better? Perfect. So to acclimate the board to the process of running the expulsion hearings, there is actually the possibility to have someone who has run the process be a coach on the side the first couple of times. So in addition to any training, there is the possibility to have someone like who has run expulsion hearings to come in and actually coach during the process. As far as the state statutes are concerned, 120.31, that entire state statute lays out the entire process from how school districts develop codes of conducts to how suspensions and expulsions are being run. The biggest reason I have this on here is in legalese and state statute, the word may and the word shall are very important terms. Wherever you see the word may, in your mind, put the word can in there. Wherever you see the word shall, put the word must in there. So in the situation where you see under state statute, a school district may expel for these bulleted items. That means that these are the items, these are the offenses that could be expellable offenses. Where the state statute says they shall expel, that is a statutory requirement that there must be an expulsion process when those offenses occur. As we go through the state statute, again, I just put on here the state statute language, and then I put in bracketed the can and the must, just to kind of get board members acclimated to the language. And that follows when we go into board policy. So these are the most predominant board policies that we have that directly relate to the state statute around suspensions and expulsions. So policies 411, 425, 443.4 and its rule, 447.3, 447.3 Rule 1 and Rule 3. These all are policies that past boards have created to provide some context and clarity. And again, the words may and shall are very important when reading through policy. Before I open up for questions, I just want to say that Rob and I have had several conversations in the past week, and he has talked about Sheila, and so I welcome Sheila to the group. This is the first time I've met her, and I know that she has past experiences with expulsion hearings, I believe, from the Milwaukee Public School Systems. And so I will turn it over to the board to start to ask questions in terms of what that process wants to look like. And in terms, sorry, Rob, you unmuted there for a second. Could you mute? Perfect. In broad terms, a expulsion process follows 4 big steps: scheduling and notice, information that people are wanting to have before the hearing, if any, the hearing process itself, and then any follow-up procedure. So as the board starts to think about and clarify exactly what it wants as far as a process, a template, and ways to acclimate and support the transition from an independent hearing officer to the board taking over that process, these are the 4 areas that we'll want to have discussions on so that it will help provide the right type of training that the board needs as they transition into this process.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kieser. And I'll just, before I turn it over to board members for questions, I just want to, not to go into teacher mode here, but I guess I want to ask that in the next week or two, everybody takes a careful look at the board policies that are highlighted on slide number 4 here in the 400 series, just so that we're best prepared for that discussion. So at this time, please put a question mark in the chat with any questions that you have at this point. Thank you. Board Member Anderson?
So the question I have for you guys is, when's the soonest that we're going to be starting our training, and then how often are we required to do that training?
I won't speak for Rob. I would say the training can be as frequent as the board feels it is needed. I would say that before we close out this conversation this evening, we should have time frame within the next 2 weeks, within the next month, so that I can work with Rob and his team to actually put together that. I will give Rob and Sheila the opportunity to share how much time they estimate it will take, because there will be a whole bunch of questions that the board will want to dive into during that training. So I would estimate it's going to be at least a few hours, if not longer. Rob and Sheila?
Yeah, I could comment. The board asked for some information, so what was provided was things we pulled together. And yeah, I want to introduce Sheila. She came to us from the Milwaukee Public Schools, where she had a lot of experience representing the board on a lot of school law issues and student issues, including advising the board on expulsion. The board does have an independent hearing officer there, but Sheila was the board's advisor for legal questions that would arise during these hearings. What we contemplate for the training would be taking the responsibilities of the board from start to finish without making it overly complex. What are the key areas that the board's got to be aware of, and walking through training on those, and then having time in a workshop format to be able to have a discussion with the board so the board could understand and make decisions on each of those responsibilities or areas. An example would be there's a notice that needs to be sent. Who's responsible for those notices? What's the content of the notices? Is the board comfortable with those notices? And then have that understood so that it's clear. I would envision, and that's why we gave you a couple of ideas about templates, where the board would have a whole template system of the notices and the hearing procedures and frequently asked questions and a sample order and the types of documents and things the board would have to be conversant with and comfortable with, so that you would say, yes, this is the process we like. Yes, this is how we're going to do this. We have a comfort level. And obviously a comfort level is going to take place after you've done this a few times. And that's the other thing I suggested, is that, we could help early in the process to make sure that those processes ran smoothly and that you had the advice you needed, so that you weren't just thrown out there having to do this, especially if there's other attorneys involved representing the parents, that type of thing. So I would envision at least a couple of hours. And the training we're talking about is before you would start doing expulsion hearings. And this is going to be an ongoing type situation to get educated and comfortable. But this is the preliminary training, is just so that you would be aware of, this is what it's all about. This is what the board needs to know. And this is what the board wants to do.
Thank you very much. And welcome, Sheila. We're glad to meet you. And thanks for being here with us tonight. Board Member Anderson, does that answer your question? Thank you very much for your question tonight. Board Member Levy.
Just a comment, and then a couple questions. I'm not clear why this is on the agenda as a discussion item, because expulsions become the responsibility of the board on Thursday. So I am hopeful that this is going to show up as an action item at our Tuesday, July 6th board meeting, with definite direction of when this training is going to happen. I think it's great, at least until we get our bearings in this process, and to make sure that both sides are served well, to have guidance in those expulsion hearings. And so my other question is, will a debriefing be available? Because you don't know what you don't know. And in the process, that's going to uncover areas where we need to make sure that certain things are shored up. So will debriefing be available, so we know these are the things we need additional training on, et cetera?
I can comment initially on that, Board Member Levy, that I know for sure that this will have to be done soon, because July 1's a key date. So we'll make ourselves available as early in July as we can to do this training. And we have some materials we've been thinking about already. And then I envision not only training so that you get a comfort level and then develop a process that you establish, but then after you would have a hearing, you would have deliberations, and there would definitely be a time for either a follow-up meeting or after the deliberations to be able to say, here's some things that we could do differently, or that you need a comfort level on, or that we need shoring up, or that need improvement. Yes, we could definitely do that. And that would be a wise thing to do, since the board hasn't done this for, in my calculation, like 25 years. So it's, yes, I envision that happening very much so.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then the other thing that we won't discuss this evening because it's not listed, but at that July 6th meeting, I would like to discuss having a family advocate, because I want to make sure that we're well prepared for these proceedings that we're taking on. And I also want to make sure that the families are well prepared as well. and going beyond the required sending of the notice, but have a liaison for the family to make sure that they understand what the materials they are receiving mean and how that impacts the student and the family moving forward.
Good. Go ahead.
Thank you, Board Member Levy. I appreciate hearing, and this is the intent is to capture what additional information the board is wanting to be a part of that overall training. So I took down having a debriefing, and then also the creation of a family advocate for the process. My only question or wondering is, in terms of an action item, what are, from your perspective, what action does the board need to take other than to set a date for the training?
To set a date for the training, to solidify exactly what that training looks like and what our responsibilities are, so that beyond, I think it's a great first step to make sure that we're very familiar with those expulsion policies, but are there other things that we need to do in order to prepare ourselves so that we can get the most out of that training? And then as far as a family advocate, it sounds like this is going to be the creation of a new position, but in the interim, if an expulsion arises, who in our district is most capable of assuming some of those responsibilities? And I'm assuming those responsibilities will evolve, but I don't feel comfortable with sending a notice and just assuming that everyone understands the process and is able to fully engage in that process. So that would take some thought on the administration's part. Who can assume these responsibilities until we can craft a position, post that, hire, etc. So those are the things that I would like to see as next steps as soon as possible.
I absolutely agree, and I appreciate you clarifying that, because to me, I think we can move forward on that without having to take a formal board vote. I was wondering if I was missing something in that conversation. So I appreciate that.
Did you have anything else, Board Member Levy? All right, thank you very much for your question and comments. Good stuff. Looks like we're going to Board Member Delgado, followed by Vice President Levy. Go ahead, please.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome, Sheila, to the team. I'm just wondering, I really like Board Member Levy's ideas, and I really support that liaison for the families, and I would really appreciate if that position was made bilingual so that it could be, in assistance to our Hispanic community as well. My question regarding the hearings and that is, will we continue to have any legal support to make sure that we are, making correct decisions based on policies and guidelines and legal guidelines? Because this situations, to be honest with you, it sounds like we're taking a big step onto something that is unknown for many of us that have never participated in something like this. So training is a must, but as far as legalities goes, do we still have support in that aspect?
Well, I can weigh in on that, and not in a self-serving way. Obviously, we envision that it would be very wise for the board, especially early on, to have support. Many boards in the state have a lawyer representing the board at every meeting. And what they would do is they would handle any legal questions that would arise. They sometimes would help the board president help run the hearing or run interference for the board if there was a lot of conflict, provide Robert's rules or parliamentarian advice, do lots of different roles. Also make sure that the documents that the board sends out, notices, orders, any written materials, any record that's kept is exactly what needs to be done. So yeah, we envision that it would be important for the board to have advice, and that could be early on, and so then the board would be very comfortable, and then selectively as the type of hearing would progress, or it would be regular. And that's completely up to the board, obviously. The answer to the question is it's up to the board, but it would probably be very wise to have support. And I told Dr. Keyser that we're in a position to do that. With an independent hearing officer, the interesting thing is that we represent the board. And so the board would sometimes need advice from me about unique cases, and I would give the board advice. But then that's where we wouldn't become the independent hearing officer. You know what I mean? We just represent the board. But in this case, with the board being the hearing officer, we would very comfortably be able to fit that role to support the board where you needed it.
Awesome, thank you. And just one last thing, being that, this role is going to create a little bit more work for us. I don't know if there's going to be like some type of secretarial assistance as well to go along with this, or, because there's going to be a lot of like paperwork that will need to be created. So just a thought.
And in the training, that's one of the other things that I want to be able to leave room for the board to do, because, like, for example, the whole documentation, the notices, who's going to handle that? Who's going to own that? Who's responsible for that? And then the board would be able to say, we want X, Y, or Z to do that and be comfortable. You know what I mean? Because that's one of the things, not to overstate it, but this is a quasi-judicial process, and it's got to be done right. There's a lot of room for error. And when the board would make an error, everybody makes an error. But when there's errors, then that's reviewable and overturnable. And so you want to process that if you're going to go through it, and you want it to be upheld. And so that's why this is very careful, it's very regulated, and it has to be done right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great questions, Board Member Delgado. Vice President Levy, followed by Board Member Wong.
All right. Rob, can you describe the process? You said that this is the last time that this Board of Education, School District of Beloit, handled their own expulsion hearings was 25 years ago?
Yeah, there's been kind of a person who was hired, Lori Medina. I don't know if you remember her, Board Member Levy, but she was, I think she worked for 23 years. And so at least for over 20 years. And a big overview of the process would be administrative decision to move to an expulsion. The board would then be activated because there's that timeline, the 10 and 15-day timeline, which creates a challenge for the board in terms of scheduling. And that's why you kind of have to be ready to go. And then, there's the notice, and then there's the pre-hearing things. What documents does the board need, and when are those delivered, so that it's fair for the parents and the student and the board, and so that we can assure impartiality. And then what happens during the hearing? What are the standards and the questions that the board has to address and make sure that you deal with, like on the evidence and on the burden of proof? And then what types of questions can you ask? What types of questions can't you ask? And then the nature of the proof you need, the deliberations, and then what the order looks like, what the educational program, what the supplement is, how long would the expulsion be, what are the other programs available to students who are expelled, those types of things. And then the proper documentation and record keeping. That's the 30-second quick overview, but that's really what the board would do. And then the question is, how long would the hearing be? How many witnesses would it be? How efficiently could this be done? That type of thing. But that's the nature of the hearing that you would have.
Right. I'm familiar with the expulsion hearing process. As a school administrator, I've participated in many. But being one of 7 as a team, as it has been spoken to, there are certain aspects that other members have not participated in, and we have to put on a district procedure and process. So that was one of the questions that kind of in reflection on last week, where an administration that is responsible for conducting expulsion hearings over the last 25 years, would have the templates and documents, the procedures down. This district does not have those in place because that work has been outsourced. So there's a development that our administration will need to take on in helping the board carry out the process of, like you said, that quasi-judicial process of hearing the case, listening to the facts, understanding our policies, and then judging by the state statutes. Is this an offense that will be expelled for at that process? Just kind of a, like I said, another summary, kind of we talked about this as board members. My understanding, there's expulsion hearings are appealable to the state superintendent. In general, as long as we have, as a board, when we're impaneled and we make that decision, our decision is our decision. Unless we have done something that is a procedural violation, when it goes to the state superintendent, that is what would bring about an appeal. And then just from other experiences and other trainings, no one wants to make that procedural violation and have something overturned. But let's say something procedurally did go wrong and it was overturned. The board, it'd be messy, but the board could hold the same expulsion hearing again and do things procedurally correct?
Correct.
Right. So I think that
it was severe enough, and it was still appropriate and timely to expel. The board could redo the process accordingly. Yes.
Right. So if
Very good point.
You mess it up, you get it done right. But like I said, nobody wants that. But I think that I do understand, like I said, as a team, at this last step of handling the expulsion hearings, sitting in that seat, as we kind of look, this is the end of our discipline process. But like we have discussed, what information comes to us, how the evidence is brought to students. Like I said, this, Board Member Levy has suggested an advocate, and Board Member Delgado added that that person also be, bilingual. Those are different procedures that for the students that we serve and to ensure that free and appropriate public education and due process, those are different things. So we're starting at the tail end with the expulsion process and our role, but I do think that even as we look at the tail end, because what we request as the things that we want in the hearing, it would necessitate action down the line that may need to be discussed, and how cases that are recommended for expulsion actually come to us, and the things that are necessary for us to conduct the expulsion hearing as we decide that we want to have it.
All right, thank you very much, Vice President Levy. Sorry, for some reason my connection was lost, so I apologize. I'm not able to see anybody in the chat right now, but just give me a moment. I know Board Member Wong is next, and I will figure that out. Thank you very much for your thoughts and comments. Go ahead, Board Member Wong.
Okay. I wasn't at the meeting last week, so I was not part of this discussion. I apologize. I was taking a vacation, which was nice. And I wasn't thinking of this. But in regards to, I have a few questions here. One, as we go down this road of quasi-legal activities, and knowing, having served on the board for 3 years now and seen a large number of different boards that I've served on because of the turnover, and knowing as well that you have individuals within the community that are not attorneys, that are becoming elected officials. And I think I know the answer to this question, but I'd just like to get clarification as well, because I think others, as time goes on, if we're going to take this on, would like to know it. Is there any personal liability that one would take on potentially as a board member throughout this process, or are we going to be protected under some policy?
It would be very, very unusual for the board to ever have any personal liability unless you violated somebody's constitutional rights intentionally and with malice and bad faith. That's why, and also you have insurance, and the board has great protection from an insurance point of view and a statutory point of view for performing the duties that are in your scope of responsibility as board members, which is very, very broad and ironically, unbelievably specifically identified in the statutes 120 that Dr. Teaser has in the packet that say that the board sets rules for the governance and the oversight of the district, including making sure that proper discipline is handled. So it's specifically a board responsibility. So I would say it would be very highly unlikely, and I don't want to scare the board at all. I mean, the types of cases would be if an individual board member in bad faith did everything within their power to prohibit somebody from exercising the rights they had. It would be the type of thing that no board member would really do unless they were irrationally acting on a completely personal level and were held responsible for it. But that's why, and again, I know that you don't want to do anything accidentally that's problematic, and that's why you get the training, like what types of questions should I be asking or not asking, and what type of information do I have the right to have? And obviously, you as board members have your own rights and your own opinion and your own right to make a decision. So it would just be, your conduct is going to be in line with that type of approach. And so I find it to be highly, highly unlikely that you would ever have any personal liability.
Thanks, Rob. I do have a follow-up question, and it's probably, I don't know, I'm guessing this would be brought up in the training to identify, because I know in the past when I've sat through these hearings and even in preparation for it, I mean, the videotapes that we would watch, each one would be anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour long. And that's not including going through all the written material as well. So I'm guessing through the training that you're going to be identifying, or it would be identified at that point as far as the time that's going to be committed to this process that we're taking on.
Yes, and I mean that's one of the issues is that these can be time consuming, and again it's time bound too because you have to be able to respond within a certain number of days. So that's why how these are presented, the efficient operation of the board, the efficient production of documentation, and the fair decision making. It's I don't want to sugarcoat that it's a time-consuming process, and again, you also might not have control because one incident could have multiple situations, and then also there could be numerous witnesses. Sometimes it's not just one witness or a quick presentation. So it's going to be hard to identify, but these will be time-consuming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your questions, Board Member Wong. While my connection was out, I did see Vice President Levy had a question. Was somebody in between the two of them? We're good? Okay, go ahead, Vice President Levy. And again, I apologize for the technology issues.
This is more of a comment, like examining some of the policies. When it comes to, like I said, looking at some of the policies, like 425, the enrollment of expelled students, where some districts may offer conditional readmittance to students that have been expelled. Currently, based on our policy, that is not something that we would be able to do, correct? Unless that policy is revised or changed.
I believe that we do have the ability to do conditional readmittance. I get those notifications each semester.
Okay. So that's just a look at, for our policies, that there are some things that might need to change or be addressed as we take on this. And then also it's a board function to serve in the role of, like I said, the jury and the judges when the evidence presented and the situations come forward, and also kind of presenting or facilitating the procedure. In most districts, though, there's administrative apparatus that is built to facilitate that happening for the board. It's not, the board clerk is not down here writing things and sending out the notices from the school district office, correct?
Sorry, Rob.
I was just going to say that's what the board has to discuss, but yeah, I mean, there's got to be some type of administrative mechanism in place for that so that it's orderly and well done and proper. I mean, yeah, exactly.
Right, and in most districts, the board secretary and the district administrator manage that process for the board.
Correct, and in conjunction with legal counsel.
Thank you very much, Vice President Levy. Are there other questions or comments at this time? Go ahead, Dr. Kieser.
So I appreciate all the questions, and I took a lot of notes as I saw a lot of others taking notes as well. So to the question at hand is, we want to set up this training. So when I come back on the 6th to provide an update, I will send out a doodle to the board to figure out using a 2 to 3 hour window to find time, and then I'll work with Rob and his team to set up a training for us to discuss both, as Rob had stated, and for me to summarize, training from start to finish, starting with notice. And I can bring to that what we currently do so that the board knows what structures are in place and then how we want to proceed moving forward. The creation of an FAQ and templates, and then the bulk of the process is really the development of a script that the board can follow, and then we can talk through what additional pieces in terms of debriefings, family advocates, and then all of the logistical pieces that we were just talking about, as Vice President Levy had stated. Who's going to take the responsibility for what part of the process, and then the follow-up that currently has. So I can bring what's currently structured in place, and then we can talk from, it's always easier to make adjustments from a known than from an unknown, so.
All right, thank you very much for that summary. It looks like Vice President Levy has a question. Go ahead, please.
So at that next meeting, are we designing the process? You know, like the simple question, well, because what Board Member Wong described was the past practice when the hearing officer would present and then the board was just approving, or the independent hearing officer made the decision and the board was approving it as they had contracted for that to happen. But if there's a process where the board is going to hear the evidence the first time at the hearing, all of those documents and tapes will be presented at that time of the hearing, not a week before with board members to peruse that information.
My intent would be that the training would be where the board would dig deep and create exactly what the board wants for the process, and how and the why, the what, and the how of the expulsion hearing process.
If I could comment too, Board Member Levy, that that's exactly, like, one of the questions was, when would the board most appropriately get the information? What's the best practice? And I know that the norm would be the board have as much pre-advance notice as possible with information, but in this situation, out of fairness, it's probably wiser to increase impartiality to get the materials right at the time of the hearing and at the same time as the parents. And if that means you take time even at the beginning of the hearing, a half hour or so, to meet with the parents, and this is where the advocate would come into play as well, to say, parents, this is what's going to be presented, this is the information that's going to be out there, so that it's a level playing field. There's no surprises. There's no desire to have any surprises. And then board, here's the information, the same information, and then you'd go through that. That's one component of what the board would have to ultimately decide how it wanted to operate. But it's also based on the statutes and case law, our experience, and best practices. And I feel badly because I've been doing all the talking. Sheila has a lot of experience, a lot to say, but in the training, you'll hear from her plenty. So.
All right, thank you, and thank you so much, Vice President Levy. Board Member Wong?
This is probably something that'll come up in training, but I'm just going to ask it anyways because I'm curious. In the past, because I'm thinking back in the past, there was generally an administrator from the specific school where the incident occurred that would be presenting the packet of information. And I'm assuming that this would probably be the same thing would be occurring, but we would all be getting it at the same time with an administrator from that specific school doing the same thing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Great, great questions. Thank you so much, everyone. I had a conversation with Rob before our meeting, and I asked him to put some dates together when he and his team would be available, kind of at the earliest possible time. So it was my hope this evening that we could agree that we would meet as soon as possible. I think we should plan for at least 3 hours. In terms of any formal action, I guess I thought we would just make sure we were on the same page and see what the earliest date available would be. So I don't know, Mr. Buckham, if you're aware of if you've already happened to have had that information put together or if that's something that can be done.
I sent out an email to Sheila and I would like, there's a special ed component to this that's very critical, and Lana Loeffler has been working with Missy on a lot of the special ed things, and so I'd like to have her available as well. And I'm guessing we will be able to give you dates in relatively early July. I know that you mentioned either the 6th or what was the other date?
Oh, I was just saying that our meetings were the 6th and the 20th, so just like not those two dates. But yeah, as soon as possible, that would be good.
I would say we could give you dates within the first 15 days of July for sure, if that's okay. Is that good for the board?
Do any board members?
We'll just as quickly as we can when you have availability as well.
Thank you. I was just going to ask if any board members had any thoughts or comments on that. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, Board Member Levy.
I'm hoping nothing will come up in the interim, but could we have our board president work with Rob and Dr. Kieser just to have, if something comes up, this is how we will address it before the board is fully trained and we're ready to go so that statutes are being met, everything is taken care of.
I am perfectly fine with that. Dr. Kieser, Mr. Buckham, were we good with that?
Yes.
What I can do is I can send an email out to the full board with an overview, and I'm certainly available to meet, and I'm open anytime. So we can put something together so there's some transparency on what that process would look like in the interim. As soon as we hear from the legal team here, Dr. Kieser and I will send out like a doodle of some kind just to make sure that we can all be available because this is obviously very important training. If people are ill or unable to be here in person, it's perfectly acceptable to do this virtually. I just want to throw that out there for childcare, whatever the situation is. So, but we should all definitely be present for that workshop. And then I guess a few people have made this point, just to iterate, maybe this isn't necessary, but I will just say that I think that our workshop, we're going to lay out, I'm hoping to walk away with a very in-depth understanding of how to get going, but I anticipate that there will be continuous PD and workshopping, if I can just make that a word, throughout this year, since this is, to Mr. Bucham's point, the first time in 25 years or so our board has participated in this. And I think Vice President Levy also made the point, we'll have to make sure that all those systems kind of are in place. So I hope that we're all anticipating and prepared for kind of a deep dive into this process. And that is all I have to say. Does anybody else have any questions or comments before we move forward? All right, so hearing none, It looks like,
Thanks, everyone. Good evening.
yes, thank you so much for your time. And Sheila, it was lovely to see you tonight. We can't wait to hear all of your expertise that you have to share with us at a date forthcoming.
Thank you. It was nice meeting all of you.
Nice to meet you too. Awesome. So that, I believe, wraps up. Let me just double check. Oh, no, it doesn't. So that moves us to item 2C. This was an item from last week. We had kind of a lengthy discussion last week, and we just kind of felt like there wasn't time to give this item its due diligence, so we moved it to this meeting. Item 2C is the resolution to the Joint Finance Committee for their upcoming 2021-2023 budget. Dr. Kieser is going to lead our discussion here.
Thank you, Board President Miller. So I bring forth to the board for consideration a resolution on the Joint Finance Committee budget proposal. I know that the board had recently approved a resolution from WPEN, and in that resolution, it talked about a lot about the 5 priority values in terms of students with disabilities, English language learners, poverty, mental health, funding, equitable funding, supports to address teacher crisis, private voucher schools and independent charters, as well as closing the educational racial disparity gap. Where WASB's resolution focuses in on the governor's proposals and how the Joint Finance Committee has significantly altered those. In the second whereas, that has actually been taken care of. Where the two differ is really in terms of highlighting the fact that there's an approximate $6 billion available surplus, and that's significantly higher than the original projections. And then also talking about the investing in the post-pandemic recovery of school children being more than just the bare minimum to meet the maintenance of effort statute. And so I put forward to this board, knowing that there are significant, there might be perceived significant overlap between the resolution passed and this one, but also this one speaks directly to the Joint Finance Committee, who is voting on the budget as we speak, I believe. So I open it up for questions and consideration.
Thank you. If anybody has a question, a thought, or a motion, you can place a question mark in the chat. Go ahead, Vice President Levy.
Like the other resolution that we approved, this resolution speaks to who we are as a district and what our priorities in the state budget are. This is a situation where oftentimes with the last conversation where people may have thought, and it was even written, that we were being overly partisan, but we are the elected leaders of the school district of Beloit, and we have to advocate our legislators to do things that will benefit children. The way that the money has been rearranged in the budget from what was requested by the governor to what will be, to what is under consideration by the party that is in control of the state government, it is a large difference. And so this is the space where, as a school district, we speak for things that we need to do the job that we have to do for our children. And that's the framework in which this should be understood.
Thank you, Vice President Levy. Any other thoughts or comments at this time? Go ahead, Board Member Wong.
As we address these resolutions, I mean, the reality is that, you know, this is a partisan situation whenever we talk about government, state funding, and things like that. Here in Beloit, we are heavily subsidized by the state government, by Madison basically in this case, to help meet our budget funding due to the Equalization Aid Act. And I think that while we are doing that, we realize that obviously that's a product of the poverty levels that we have in comparison to other districts around the state. In fact, pretty much all of them. But as we continue to vote in and vote for these resolutions, and I'm not saying I'm against it or not against it, I should say, is we need to be cognizant of the job that we're doing within our district itself. And I think that as we are doing this, we have to look at it, because taxpayers are looking at us saying, you need to be accountable for the dollars that you're receiving from us. And when we produce the results that we have and the scorecards that we have, I think as a taxpayer, me being one of them, I begin to kind of question, okay, are we doing the best job that we can for our students? So we need to really look at that and look at it as a board, as administration, across and we've had a rough go of it over the last 4 or 5 years. So we need to think about that I know we have to be good stewards of the money, but as we do vote for these resolutions, we need to think we need to be doing the best job we can. And the rankings don't show that at this point.
Thank you, Board Member Wong. Board Member Levy.
I just want to make sure that I understand all perspectives that are being shared. So Board Member Wong, if you are able to elaborate like tangibly what you just said, what that means, when we need to be looking at a better job of how we're utilizing, and I'm paraphrasing, I just want to be clear about that. Are you saying that since we're not doing very well, we shouldn't ask for or solicit or advocate for funding? Or are you saying something different? I just want to make sure that I'm understanding your comments.
No, and that's fine. I just think that as we are large recipients of tax dollars, extremely large recipients of tax dollars, that we need to be putting out the best product possible. And I know that we work hard. We have great staff members and administrators over the years, but I think that we've struggled in a leadership capacity, specifically at this level. So I think that we need to look at that very hard and say, we need to be doing a much better job. What can we do to improve our district from a leadership standpoint to make sure that we are not seeing the declining enrollment, and we have a lot of competition here. So as we are being judged by the public, I think that a lot of it comes down to if people, taxpayers are going to be very critical of how the money and how it's spent. And like I said, it's not just how it's spent. And I know that we have a lot of headwind against us, but I just think that we need to, as I've sat in this seat for the last 3 years and sat in many of the audience seats for 3 to 4 years prior to that, there's been a lot of challenges at the board level. So I think we just need to think about that as like I said, I'm not saying that we shouldn't vote for this, because I think that yes, if we feel like yes, we can do that, we're in a much better situation now. We're going to work harder at it than perhaps previous boards. Great, wonderful, let's do it.
Just one quick follow-up, and then I yield the floor to whoever else. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding you. And again, I'm paraphrasing, but when you say we need better leadership, are you referring to us personally as, and not personal, but collectively as board members, the administration? I don't understand what that means or what that looks like. And I know that I'm putting you on the spot. So if you want to think about that and get back, I think it's an important enough point for us to understand moving forward. I'm fine with either addressing it now or at a later date.
No, I'm happy to address it now. I think that it's exactly that. It's the leadership that we have. We need to be thinking about that collectively and saying, are we doing, honestly, the best thing in all of our, collectively, for the betterment of our school district to grow it? And I guess, yes, absolutely. That's the way I think about that.
All right, thank you.
So the board, thank you.
Thank you very much, Board Member Levy, and thank you, Board Member Wong. Dr. Kieser, followed by Vice President Levy.
I appreciate all of the comments, and I just want to take an opportunity I'm looking at this, Board Member Wong, from a different perspective, and I'm going to start with where you started in terms of our district is heavily tied to what happens in Madison. Last checked, between 85 and 87 cents on every dollar is coming from state funding. Where this resolution is targeted towards is that we can't change that. We can't change the formula and we can't change the dynamic. But what people that are elected at the state level are doing are directly relating to the work that we're doing. So I don't see the connection, direct connection to your second half of the point where you're talking about stewardship of the funds. But I do know that if we don't advocate for the funding levels at the state, it won't matter because the state's going to give us whatever the state's going to give us, and we're going to have to be the best stewards of those funds, whatever those may be. And I think advocating for fully funding our educational system provides the best amount of resources so that we can be the best stewards of those resources for our students. So that's where I see I see the first half and the second half being two totally separate conversations, and from that perspective.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kieser. Vice President Levy?
Thinking about some of the things that Board Member Wong has said, I do understand the perspective that he's bringing. We've had conversations where we've talked about different things. For me, I want to bring back that as the elected board members for the School District of Beloit, one of the things I think that we have to think about is not being afraid of negative or stereotype threat. For us as a district, what our current student performance is, what it has been over the last several years, what people say about us as a district. Yes, it helps us to be reflective, but the situation we are in is not one that was developed overnight. And as we try to improve our norms and practices, it won't change overnight either. Looking at our 2018-19 school report card, where we met few expectations, we had 6,474 students. The majority of our students are Black, brown, and of two or more races. And our entire student population, 71.4% of those students are economically disadvantaged, meaning that they qualified for free or reduced lunch. I think that we are community stewards and we represent vulnerable people. And we have a range of taxpayers in the room and property values across the city. It is important that we do our work, and I'm looking at the work that we were given from School Perceptions on page 9. Our board meetings are efficient and effective, and we evaluate the superintendent at least annually. Those were 2 low marks that we received. But when I think about the actions that we've taken over the last couple weeks, those are things that we've done to directly address those areas. So what I am excited about is that as board members, you had the freedom to say what you felt. Others have said what they want to say. And we've had the personal relationships that we're not personally attacking each other as we talk and have understanding. And I think that that shows, again, the growths and strides that we are making. Because, yes, people are saying, what are you guys doing down there? Because we've been in a situation for so long, people just want to see something happen positive. So I do appreciate what I hear you saying is, hey, we can do whatever we do, but we need to make sure that we're meeting expectations, that we're continuing to improve. That's how I hear your comments.
Thank you so much, Vice President Levy. Board Member Wong.
Thank you for those comments, and I appreciate that as well. And like I said, I'm being critical of our school board just because I want to see improvement. That is the number one goal. And it's frustrating when you don't see it. It's frustrating when you see turnover in the seats that we've had and turnover in the administration. And I think that, perception does become a reality. And when you start to see the droves of students leaving the district to do the school choice, we have to understand that, yes, we need to be doing a better job. And, what we've been doing in the past obviously isn't working. And I would agree as well that hopefully some of the steps that we're taking over the last few weeks and with committee structures and what we're looking forward to in the future will help to improve that to the point where we were respected and it was a place where people wanted to come and bring their kids and they wanted to work here. So.
Thank you for your comments, Board Member Wong. Does anybody else have any thoughts or comments at this time? Seeing none, would anybody like to make a motion? Oh, I am so sorry. Go ahead, Board Member Levy.
No apology needed. I move approval of the 2021-22 0.1 Resolution Joint Finance Committee, also known as JFC, 2021 through 2023 budget proposal.
Second.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion at this time?
Just a minute.
Go ahead, Vice President Levy.
I just wanted to add, as we get ready to make this motion, and just another point of view, I'm not sure where this work is at in the state. This is why, on last week, I did want us to get to it, but our board president made an executive decision that needed to be made as we had talked about norms for how we're going to conduct our meetings. And so as we stand here now, I know that this work has been taken up in the assembly. I don't know what the outcome yet is because we're here right now, but that it'll possibly be taken up in the Senate on tomorrow. However it goes, I think that for people to have an understanding, what we're trying to do is we're trying to be a part of the number. We're trying to have our voice added to the chorus that says these are things that we want from our legislative members, whether it happens or not. Of course, we'd like the things that we want to happen, but that's the reason that we take these types of actions. When they read the newspapers throughout the state and hear of the 421 districts in different situations, but passing similar resolutions, that should show our community members that your school district is standing up for you in the way that other board members across the state are in some of these actions. This is a way to interpret what is actually happening.
Thank you very much, Vice President Levy, for your comments. Does anybody else have any thoughts, comments, or questions before we vote? May we have a roll call, please?
Anderson,
Aye.
Delgado,
Aye.
Amy Levy,
Aye.
Sean Levy,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Wong.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. And just so everyone's aware, because I want to build on, I guess, what Vice President Levy was getting at. I know there was some public discourse after our last resolution. What happens next, so for awareness, is this resolution is sent to our state lawmakers, the people on the Education Committee, pretty much everybody who has a hand in voting on or considering that legislation. So that will happen either later this evening or first thing tomorrow morning, most likely later this evening in the form of an email once it's signed. So it's basically just sending a letter to our legislators. Thank you. All right, so I believe that concludes section 2, the board discussion, information, or action items. At this time, I'm about to ask for a motion for us to go into an executive session to continue our superintendent evaluation. and to approve closed session minutes. It is my understanding that we will be adjourning from closed session and we will not be returning into open session at any time later this evening. So that will conclude momentarily the live broadcast of our meeting tonight. Does anybody have any questions, comments before we accept a motion to go into executive session? Hearing none, I will accept a motion to move us into executive session at this time.
A move to convene the Board of Education into closed session pursuant to Section 19.85, Parent 1, Parent C of the Wisconsin State Statutes relative to considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Board Member Wong, second by Board Member Anderson to go into executive session. May we please have a roll call vote? Aye.
Sorry.
Delgado.
Delgado.
Aye, and we can't hear.
Anderson.
Aye.
Wong.
Aye.
Amy Levy.
Aye.
Sean Levy.
Aye.
Okay, I believe that motion passes by 6 votes. Thank you very much, everybody who tuned in this evening, and we hope you have a great night. And board members tuning in from home, we're going to take maybe like a 5-minute recess, and then we'll jump into executive session. Thank you very much. See you soon.